Hi, my name is Josh McDonald. I'm one half of the Hand Therapy Academy team. Today we're going to work on making one of the most common splints that we make in the hand therapy practice. We're going to make a short opponent splint. We make this for patients with CMC arthritis. So if they have pain at this joint of the hand, it's oftentimes from an osteoarthritis, and so we're going to make a splint that's going to help stabilize some of that. We talk in one of the blog posts attached to this about why this works, how it works, and the mechanism. But one of the things it does is provide the external support to that joint that they don't have intrinsically. Keeps the joint approximated and gives them some stability while they're doing what little power grasp they need to do. So we're going to work on making this splint. We're going to make it two different ways. This way we're going to do it in this video is making it using a slight pattern. You can buy these patterns off of like Patterson or Royalin or some of the other companies, and it's kind of this butterfly looking pattern that has a split down the middle, and well, I don't like using patterns a lot. And this one in particular comes in 4 or 5 different sizes, and it means I have to just have that much more stuff on hand. Stock I have to buy, things I have to keep track of, inventory to manage. And I'm not a big fan of relying on patterns that I can run out of and keeping things, money I'm paying to keep these things in stock. So today we're going to take a really simple piece of 1/16 aquaplast, and we're going to make that pattern in the same way. I don't make a lot of patterns, but this is just a different version. At the end of these 2 videos on how to make this different versions of these splints, we'll talk about why we would do this one or why we would use the other one at different times. So let's talk about why we're going to make this pattern. I don't measure for a lot of splints, but for this one, I want to get a measurement of the circumference of the IP joint. So here I'm going to measure the circumference. I'm going to use centimeters, and you can see here we measure the outside, and she's about 6.5 centimeters. We're going to round that up to 7. Again, always good to have a little bit extra, not a ton, but we'll take it at 7. I'm going to lay that fabric tape measure just kind of gently around here, get a general idea of what 7 centimeters looks like, make a little mark at the 0 on one side, make a little mark at the 7 on the other, and then just kind of draw a gentle radius that follows that curvature right there, nice and dark so you guys can see it, okay? Then I'm going to lay her hand out there with the IP joint on that first curve I drew. Then I'm going to have that gentle 45-degree line there. I'm going to make a mark roughly at the MCP, but about a centimeter proximal to that. Then the wrist crease, again, about a centimeter proximal to that. Again, always good to have a little bit of extra material. Okay, take that off. I'm going to follow that gentle arc on the outermost line. So we're going to follow from that line all the way around. So we'll draw that here from one end, make the connection all the way around. Okay, that middle mark, I'm going to come in to that MCP mark and then back out again. That makes a little cut, and that will be what we wrap around the web space there. So again, I'm going to lay that on here. You can kind of see what it looks like. I've got the mark for the IP, the MCP, and the CMC. I can also use this on her other hand. This isn't real super specific and detailed, but it gives me a general idea so that if she were to have edema, I could use either hand, one side or the other, to make use out of it. So you can see what we have there, and we're ready to move on. Okay, so now that we've got our pattern cut out, we did this, okay? We've got that pattern cut out. Again, this is not super measured and perfect. This is general gross estimations so that we have something that will fit. Because what we're going to use is a tag and stretch method. So we're going to kind of wrap this around, give a little tug, tag it together. The aquaplast does a good job of not sticking permanently, so I can untag and adjust as I need to. Once it hardens and cools, then I can untag it and make the cuts I need to. So this gives us a little bit more play, a little more margin for error. When I cut this off of the base square that we had originally, I also cut off a couple little extra pieces that are nice to have later on. Nothing real specific, I just hacked off 2 little pieces like this. We'll show you how these work to help the Velcro stay on so it doesn't peel off. And then I cut off something this length. And this is roughly the distance that's like 2/3 the length. Again, it's bigger than it needs to be lengthwise, and probably about that width. Oh, that's like 1.5 centimeters, something like that. So we'll use this later to help with the seam that runs down the back of the thumb. So I'm going to put this in the heat. Because it's 1/16 thickness aquaplast, it doesn't take long to heat up, so that'll be fine. In the meantime, I'm going to take this length that I have of stockinette. I'm going to cut a little bit of a slit down one end. I'm going to slide this over her thumb. That slit helps me get past the web space on the radial side, and then on the palmar side, that's kind of where that slit ends. Okay? Okay? That gives me a spacer. We all have this differential between the P1 circumference and IP circumference. So this gives me a little bit of a spacer. We've all had that time when we made a thumb spica splint, whether short or long opponent's thumb spica, and it got stuck. And it was this awkward moment of the patient kind of getting a little alarmed, a little concerned, because we're tugging and trying not to hurt. This gives me a little bit of a spacer. If I see a patient with a really large differential between IP and P1, I'll even double layer this and pull it out and double it up. Not always necessary. I've seen some some therapists come in with a little Allen wrench and use that to kind of squeeze in between, open it up a little bit. If worst case scenario, I can untag it, pull it off, it comes off just fine, and then when I heat it and seat it back together again, I just make it a little bit less overlap when I reseat it. So this gives me that little bit of spacer. Then I take some stockinette that I've cut a little thumb slit in. We put that on next. So whole hand goes in, thumb goes in here, and I put this on second so it helps kind of hold down the tails of that. Otherwise I get these weird little like roll marks here on the splint, and of course we want it to look good. It's got to look good too, right? This is when I practice with them and say, I want to see a gentle tip-to-tip touch. So let's practice that here. I want to know that A, they're capable of acquiring that position, because if they can't, it's not fair for me to ask them to do that with a splint on. And B, I want to make sure they understand what I'm talking about. A couple of times we've all made that splint and we ask the patient to gently move your wrist or put your fingers here, and they do it with some force, and it blows the whole thing up, and we get wrinkles and it folds over, and they're hurting themselves. And so we practice this gentle tip-to-tip touch so I know they can and they understand how gentle it is, that I don't want any force, any of that. So we relax and come out of that. I'm going to have her hand right about here. Just makes it an easy working surface for me. We'll drape it over the top, and then we'll put it on, we'll tag it and have her acquire that position from there. So let's pull it out of the heat. Okay, so that split that I made goes around her thumb in the web space. I'm going to tag it on the back all the way down. I smooth it out. And then I'm going to have her make that gentle tip-to-tip touch, okay? As she does that, I'm going to continue to make sure it stays nice and smooth, okay? While it's on, I'm going to go ahead and trim that tag because I want just a little bit of rise there, not a ton, okay? So I can see those ends come and meet pretty darn close to perfect there. I'm going to add a little piece on, this longer piece that we cut, and that's going to go here. I'm going to heat it and glue it on, so I'll drop it in now. That makes sure that seam doesn't come apart. So I'm going to put that in there, and then we're just going to wait for this to harden a little bit, okay? Before we finish, we're going to make sure that we've cut off a whole bunch of extra here. So what I'm going to do now is take and mark where we're going to trim. You can see on the front side here, I'm going to follow that thenar crease all the way around, come back just distal to the snuff box. I really don't like it ending right on the snuff box. It just causes some friction, some wear and tear. Some patients will complain that it kind of hurts right there. So I try to end just like a half or a quarter of a centimeter distal to that. Then on the back side, I'm going to get as much coverage as I can. So I'm going to start way out here and come around just proximal to that, the apex of that MCP. Then I'm going to come this way, and I'm going to make those two roughly meet, just like that. Okay? Now, it doesn't need to be any higher in that web space than necessary. So to keep it from causing some pain here on the volar part of the index finger, I'm going to come through and I'm going to lower that a little bit. So if you can see here, we'll show you when we're all said and done, but I'm going to make that line come a little lower. That way, when she's opening and closing, it doesn't pinch on that crease right there, the volar MCP. So that's pretty good. We've got that set. I'm going to put some glue on here. This is the self-bonding solvent. Doesn't need a lot of this. I'm going to clean up the brush a whole lot before I put any on her, otherwise it just gets through the sock and makes kind of a mess. And I'm going to gently brush up here. Exactly where that piece that I just put in the water is going to go. And I might as well go a little bit bigger than I need. Set that off to the side. And now we'll pull this back out of the heat. Got to find it in there. Gets lost sometimes. Okay, it's all cleaned off. I'm going to lay it on top. right down the center line of that seam. And I'm going to give just a little bit of pressure to make sure it adheres. Okay? Okay. Now, this, if I can, I'm going to try to pull it out now. Frees up some of that space in there. Every once in a while, I have a patient who, when I'm pulling on that, because of the natural arthritis pain that they have, that hurts. So I don't have to do that, okay? If I can tell that, like, oh, you know, it just doesn't feel good and it's not coming off right, then I'll hold off on that. But that worked pretty well, came out nice and easy. It's a good indication of how this is going to slide off. So we're going to pull. I leave the sock behind. Doesn't have to, but I leave it behind. And I tell them this is disposable. It's not going to last long. You can take a little, like a thin men's dress sock, cut the toe off in a thumb hole to make that last long. Especially in Arizona here, people like having something to be a buffer between them and the heat of the Arizona sun, especially when it's 120 outside. So I'm going to trim off where that yellow line was. Come around this way. And this is not going to be a perfect edge. That's okay, because I'm going to put on our felt edging that we use. And we've put up posts on our Instagram account of where to find that at Central Shippy. So if you want, you can go back and find that on where to find our felt edging. If you have questions, you can certainly post those too. So I'm going to do another test fit here. So this is the general look that we have. I'm going to do another test fit, make sure it slides on and off easily, right? I don't want that to be super tight. I don't want it rattling around in there, but not super tight either. Now, this edge is not super friendly, right? That gets a little bit jagged. So what I'm going to do is put it in the heat, and I'm going to dip about 1/8 of an inch into the water. Okay? Only takes about 5 seconds to hold it in there. And while it's in there, it's softening up just that edge that I'm going to roll. So when I pull that back out, tap it off, now I'm going to fold that edge down and out. Okay? Making that a rolled edge, especially on a perforated material, really helps to make it a little bit less aggressive, especially on that volar IP joint. Okay? So I'll clean that up, make it look nice. I've got a little bit of that yellow line showing there. I won't put the felt edge up here. So if they're a little bit more concerned because that yellow line's showing, I can take like a Clorox wipe and that takes that off pretty well. I'll make sure that doesn't shrink in and get smaller in circumference as it cools. Just kind of keep pushing that out. One more test fit. There, and she's good. She can move that IP freely, and she's got that good opposition of that index finger. Okay. Now we're going to put stickies on. The Velcro brand stickies I use are better to be heated, so if I need to, I'll hold them over the heat only for about 5, maybe 8 seconds. Too long, and it starts to warp. It starts to melt the hook on this side, and it's just not necessary. So I'll put that on here with some heat. So I have one on the back side coming down at like a little bit of a 30-degree angle. I'll put one on the front side at a little bit of a 30-degree angle. While I'm doing that, I'm going to take those 2 other little pieces that we cut. I'm going to put those in the heat because those, in just a moment, are going to help us hold these on. One of the comments we get back from patients, if we don't do this one's a little bit long, so I'm going to trim that down a little. One of the comments we'll get from patients is that they say that if they're using it a ton and they love it, they'll say every time I pull it off, it pulls a little bit of that Velcro away, and it eventually just takes that whole sticky off all the way. So what we've come up with is we take a little bit of the same solvent again, and I really put hardly any on. A little goes a long way because this brush holds way more than you need. And I'm going to put a little bit of that solvent along here. Okay? Then, when I pull one of these back out and dry it off, I can put it over top of that edge. The edge they'll be pulling from. I like to use the same color so it matches, but if you got a patient who wants some fun highlight color there, you can add something there. But that's going to hold that on. So every time they pull that strap off, it's not going to lift that back edge of the Velcro up. Okay? Last thing I'll do, we'll assume I put one there to match. Last thing I'll do is add my edging. And this is an adhesive backed felt edging. I cut it about 3/4 of an inch in width, and I'll take a little bit of this backing off. Okay. We get it in large rolls that come in a sheet, so we have to cut these off ourselves as we go. We haven't found someone that sells them reasonably priced in individual strips, so we just, it's something we do every once in a while when we're in a slow time, is we cut 12 or 15 or however many we need, and we put them on most of our splints with the exception of finger splints. So I'll start this at a spot that may be a little tricky. I don't think you see anything here that's going to be a problem. I'll put it so it's splitting the difference there. So I have 50% of the width on the outside, 50% on the inside, and I'll just kind of have it ride that 50% line all the way around, and I'll get just back to the beginning, just short of it, and then I'll come and push that down. And that gives us a much softer edge. Now, if a patient really wants to do swimming, if they want to be active in the water, then I may not put the edging on, because the edging has a tendency not to stay on as well when it gets totally soaked or saturated in water. So we have doctors who will say, oh, you know, you should go get a splint instead of a cast because the kid can swim in the summertime, or in this case, they can go in the hot tub or do water aerobics, whatever it is. If that's the case, then I ask ahead of time, especially in the summertime. If that's the case, then I won't put the edging on. I may just work a little harder to make sure all those perforated edges are smooth and not jagged. So we take this, slide it back on, and I'm going to attach one strap here. I like to come down around the base of the hypothena or eminence, just to give a little bit more purchase down there. If I come across the palm, it still has a tendency to come out, so I'll just angle it just a little bit, which is why my strips have that little bit of an angle. Come onto the back side, made a little bit long, so we'll trim that down. Again, gotta look good, right? Gotta make sure it looks nice and has finished edges. No Velcro hanging out that can catch all their clothes, but at the same time, no big giant tag hanging out. So there we go. That is our simple pattern base to a short opponent's or CMC joint arthritis splint. So we have nice round opposition that we can make, but it still gives stability to that CMC joint. So now we're going to cover a video on how to do one without a pattern at all. There's a couple of different versions, and here's another simple one that shows how to make one without a pattern. And then at the end, we'll talk about the pros and cons to both with Miranda and I. Thank you.